Hi, this is Jay Schmidt, and I'm going to tell you some untold stories about Fort Warren. I conducted dozens of fort tours and gave many speaking engagements after my book was published in 2003. Now, if you look at the top of Fort Warren's picture here, you'll see a channel between Lovell's Island and the fort. This is called the Narrows, and it was the main shipping channel until the early 1900s when the main channel was dug by Deer Island. So that's why Fort Warren was placed on George's Island. It was completed roughly the bulk by 1850, but it wasn't finished until sometime during the Civil War itself. In April 1861, the first Union soldiers arrived, and they had to finish putting the fort together. In October 1861, the first Confederate political prisoners arrived and completely shocked the troops. They had no idea they were going to be turned into a partial prison. There were more than 2,200 prisoners held at the fort in total. Only 13 prisoners died, so they were treated pretty well. Not all of them were there at the same time. There were constant releases by exchanges and paroles. Now there were two Union bounty jumpers where they signed up with the unit, collected the bounty, and deserted. They were the most hated criminals at the time. And two guys named Carpenter and Riley were executed at this site on April 22nd, 1864. They were told to kneel down next to their open coffins, and two squads of riflemen aimed at them and shot them. The bodies were placed in the coffins and sent to relatives. They were not buried in the fort, as some people claim. This bastion faces the main channel into Boston Harbor at that time. You can see the Rodman cannons lined up to defend the city. This is the same bastion viewed today from the abandoned Jack Adams Battery. You can see Boston in the distance. The Rodman cannon mounts are still visible today. And here's a close-up of one of the cannons that was at Fort Warren, along with some of the troops. And this is the parade grounds taken sometime during the Civil War. Now here are some Union soldiers at the sally port. Now note the wooden doors with bolts in them to prevent enemy troops smashing the doors with axes. These doors still stand today. And here is the sally port today. It was once the only entrance into the fort. Now this is Vice President Alexander Hamilton Stevens. He was the most important prisoner ever held at Fort Warren. He was captured when the war ended in May 1865, and he was held through October. He thought he was going to be executed, but he was not, and he was eventually released. He was treated very well. Now, the John Brown song was written and first sung at Fort Warren. It was about a Union soldier. It was not about John Brown, the abolitionist. The 12th Massachusetts Regiment, commanded by Fletcher Webster, Daniel Webster's son, was known as the Webster Regiment. The 12th Massachusetts took it from the fort down to Washington, D.C., and when they sang it, Julia Ward Howe heard the song, and she wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic and used the same tune. The Endicott period was created by the Endicott Board in the late 1890s. They put concrete fortifications around most of the forts in New England, and they put major modifications in Fort Warren, including Battery Bartlett and Battery Stevenson. Here is Battery Stevenson test firing during World War II. These 12-inch disappearing guns fired a large shell 8 miles out to sea. After firing, they retracted behind the wall, they could be loaded, and then they would pop up again, as the one in the background is doing right now. And this is Battery Stevenson today. It's still standing, but it's getting old. In World War II, the 231st Coast Artillery was assigned to Fort Warren. It was a mine control center where they controlled all of the mines in Boston Harbor. The big guns were removed in 1944, and the fort itself was deactivated in 1947. Here are some abandoned wooden cable reels just after World War II. The cables were used in the adjacent minefields. Here are the murals inside the John Brown Chapel that were painted in World War II. The chapel was later set on fire and destroyed by vandals on May 16, 1981. This photo of the main pier was taken sometime before the fort was open to the public in the 1950s. The officers' quarters on the right was torn down. Now, after the war, Edward Rowe, pictured here, famous author, and some concerned citizens were upset that the fort might have been used for a dumping ground or whatever, so they petitioned to save it, and the fort was turned over to the Commonwealth in 1958. It was then opened to the public in 1961 after some modifications, became a national landmark in 1970, and the visitor center was opened in 2010. The ghost of the Lady in Black is the famous legend first told by Edward Rowe Snow. As the story goes, a lieutenant was captured and held here at Fort Warren, and his young wife came up the East Coast trying to find him. She dressed in men's clothing, rode across the channel, and was walking along here outside of this bastion. And there was a prearranged signal. They lowered a rope, and they dragged her up into the bastion. And they decided to escape, so they started digging. The soldiers heard them, and they notified Colonel Dimmick. He came in to see what was going on. She grabbed a pistol, fired it at the colonel. It exploded and killed her husband. So she was then arrested as a spy, and then she was tried and convicted and sentenced to be hanged at the fort. And she said, "I have one request, that I be hanged in women's clothing." And all they could find was some black robes of some kind from a play or whatever. And they wrapped her in the black and they hanged her. And since then, there have been sightings of a woman dressed in black. Here are a couple of filmmakers I took on the fort one day. Alec Aston was a filmmaker, and Michael Phillips. I gave them each a tour. They wanted to look the fort over to see if there was a possibility that they could come up with some ideas. There's been a lot of paranormal interest in the fort. The Travel Channel did a pretty good presentation called The Ghosts of Boston. The Ghost Hunters TV show came to the fort and looked around, but they decided not to film. I've taken many local paranormal investigators on tours. By the way, that's my picture taken by Alec Aston. I had no idea that he did it, but you can see how a filmmaker thinks. But people have asked me, did you ever see anything paranormal? And all my time at the fort, the answer is no. But one day I was taking a paranormal investigator on a tour. I walked through a dark area. I came outside and he said, "Hey, there was an orb next to you in there. I got a picture of it." And he showed me the picture of the orb next to me, but I didn't see it. Here is the mine observation tower, the gray building on the right. And here is where they would watch for enemy ships coming in over the minefield, which was submerged at the bottom of the seabed. And if an enemy ship came over, they could fire electronically to blow it up. Here's Bastion A. In World War II, it was a movie theater and used for indoor training. In the 1970s, one of the police officers who was assigned at the fort had a pet dog who always refused to go inside. Something creepy about this bastion, and the dog wouldn't go in. The last federal prisoner was not a Civil War prisoner. It was Joe the Animal Barboza. He was at a mob trial in Boston because he was a witness, so they had to protect him. So he was secretly held upstairs in the mine storage building. He was given anything he wanted to eat, and he was treated like a king. This was in the late 1960s, and I was told that when they were guarding him one night, the federal officers heard what sounded like a woman screaming from out back, and they both ran outside with their guns drawn, and they found nothing. Nobody knows what it was that they heard. Now, today, the mine storage building is a visitor center. You can see up in the top left. They've got a food service also. And the museum is very good. They got some interesting exhibits, interesting boards to read about, and it's a fun place to go. Now, if you'd like more information about the fort, you can get a paperback or digital edition of my book at Amazon. Be advised, the digital edition does not have any photos. It was done many years ago before they could upload them to ebooks. But lots of information and photos in the book if you're interested. Well, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video.